Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. The other day I reviewed the Wave 3 Evil Warriors expansion for Masters of the Universe Battleground from Archon Studio, which included two of my favourite villains, Stinkor and Whiplash. Today we're going to look at the Wave 3 Masters of the Universe expansion, which Archon released at the same time. Let's see if our heroic forces are getting some decent reinforcements to tackle the new threats to Eternia. This expansion has a similar format to the other character packs I've looked at on the channel, so you get two plastic miniatures, this time it's Buzz-Off and Manny Faces, a new type of terrain, in this case a crater, a selection of new cards, and then build instructions and a rules pamphlet covering any new rules. Interestingly, this expansion also includes two cardboard tokens for Manny Faces. They aren't included in the contents list on the box, and they were actually taped to the outside of the packaging, so I'm guessing there was some kind of production oversight that meant the tokens were printed off after the expansion was assembled. So, if your box doesn't have those tokens stuck on the outside, query it with your retailer. Moving on, let's take a look at the plastic. You get one frame holding both characters and the new crater terrain element. Everything looks really good. The terrain element is a good size, covering 7 hexes, and while it's not the most exciting thing we've ever seen for the game, it's just a hole in the ground after all, it's well sculpted and detailed. But just look at Buzz-Off's wings, that's some great work. It's also nice to see they continue to keep the miniatures in as few pieces as possible. Both characters are in just 5 parts, including the base, so these should go together nice and easily. We'll look at them assembled later on. First, we'll go through their special rules. The two characters offer very different playstyles. Buzz-Off is naturally very fast and nimble, quite reactive, and has skills that trigger easily, while Manny Faces requires a more methodical approach with skills that necessitate a degree of forward planning. Here's Buzz-Off, who has only 16 points to add to your team. His stats aren't great. He has 4 wounds, 3 toughness, 2 mind, 2 power, 3 perception and 4 strength, but he is very mobile with a speed of 6 or 9 when focused. Where Buzz-Off excels is being prepared for anything, being versatile, and being agile enough to seize objectives. His Eye of the Bee skill means that any and all skill tests he performs when using focus gain +1 dice, which is really useful. Meanwhile, Hero in the Sky triggers each time any ally anywhere on the battlefield gains a focus token. When it triggers, Buzz-Off is immediately allowed to jump 1 space and that movement cannot be interrupted. This allows him to disengage from combat, make free moves to take key objectives, or reposition himself to make his own interruptions and activations later on. His basic equipment is the short axe, which costs 2 points. At first blush, it doesn't seem like the best weapon. It has no modifier on the attack roll and will frequently only inflict a single wound. However, it works with Buzz-Off's playstyle very well, as it can inflict an additional wound if you get 3 successes while using a focus token. And of course, the Eye of the Bee skill means that when you use a focus token, you get more dice to roll, and it's much more likely you will get those successes. Additionally, attacks with the short axe cost 1 action less to a minimum of 1, giving Buzz-Off more chances to make attacks and slowly chip away at the health of his enemies. Next up is Manny Faces, who costs 18 points. His stats are pretty average, but there's a reason for that we'll get into in a moment. He has 5 wounds, 3 toughness, 3 mind, 3 power, 3 perception, 3 strength, and a speed of 5 or 8 when focused. His skills, and also his basic weapon, are really interesting as they allow you to manipulate these basic stats to adjust to different battlefield roles as necessary. Face of the Robot means he gains a robot token and a focus token. Buzz-Off does a happy dance. While Manny Faces has this token, he gains +2 perception, but his toughness drops by 1. Conversely, Face of the Monster means he gains a monster token. While he has this token, he gains +2 strength, but his mind drops by 1. Additionally, he can test strength -1 against the toughness of an adjacent enemy, and on a success he inflicts 1 wound. What really makes Manny Faces a standout character that plays very differently from any previous character in the game is the way his basic equipment interacts with his skills. For 2 points he can start with the laser gun, which has a range of 12 and +1 dice on the attack. If it inflicts 2 wounds, which requires 2 successes, Manny Faces also gains a protection buff. However, the gun changes whenever Manny Faces changes personality. When he switches to the robot, the gun gains 4 inches in range and loses the ability to give Manny Faces a protection buff. If he switches to monster, the gun loses 4 inches of range and can't grant a protection buff, but it can be used as a melee weapon. So Manny Faces' 3 forms allow him to switch from an all-round fighter to a marksman or a melee specialist, and that's really interesting to me. The expansion includes 4 other weapons. First is the long axe, which costs 4 points and is actually the other axe Buzzoff's miniature is holding. It can inflict up to 3 wounds, which is great, even though that does require 5 successes to pull off. But what makes the axe better is the special ability that grants the character holding it a protection buff if they have a focus token at the end of their activation. Rebel Pistol costs 2 points, it has a range of 8 inches and you get +1 dice on the roll. While it only inflicts a maximum of 1 wound, rolling 2 successes grants the user a focus token, which is a good ability. Furthermore, the weapon doesn't take a ranged weapon slot, so you can give it to someone who wouldn't normally be able to take a ranged weapon, and if you interrupt an enemy to use this gun, you can target any enemy you want. The 2 spells in this expansion are actually buffs to assist allies, and they cost 2 points each. Power of Friendship requires 2 mana and grants the caster and the target the enhancement buff. The Swiftness spell, which also requires 2 mana, grants the target a quickness buff and also has the chance to grant them a focus token as well. We also have 4 new trinkets. King's Goblet, which costs 2 points, is a great item for your support class characters who are more about seizing objectives and protecting allies rather than attacking, as if the user doesn't attack, they gain a focus token at the end of their turn. The Visor is also very cool as it allows you to trigger Overwatch from enemy attacks as well as enemy movements. As it only costs 1 point, it seems like a great deal for those characters like Man-at-Arms who like to sit on Overwatch. The Assassin's Belt costs 2 points and is a good one for really mobile characters. The wearer's flank attacks gain 1 dice. And then we have the Bomb Pack, which is a disposable item costing 3 points. The user can spend an action to place a crater within 8 inches. Craters are really interesting because they are classed as high obstacles, and you can place them on hexes occupied by characters or other terrain. Characters are immediately moved to any empty hex adjacent to the crater, while any terrain elements partly overlapped by the crater are removed. Craters can be used to completely reshape the battlefield, destroying enemy marker tokens, terrain elements, force fields, teleporters, blocking access points to objective markers, or simply repositioning enemies. That's just fun. Finally, this expansion includes 3 new Fate cards and 1 new Glory card. The first Fate card is really good for teams that like to play with buffs, as it grants the character 1 extra action and 1 extra mana if they have a buff. The second Fate card gives you a high chance of activating first, and while it does take all your mana tokens, it does give you an Overwatch token and a focus token at the end of your activation. The final Fate card is beneficial if you play it during an interruption, as it allows the character to move in any direction rather than moving towards the enemy that triggered the interruption. The Glory card is a good one for very aggressive teams, as it grants 30 victory points if you can knock out an enemy in the first round. And that's everything, so let's get these miniatures assembled and have a closer look. Here's Buzzoff. He went together pretty easily, except it's a bit fiddly to get his right arm positioned correctly as you are lining the socket up against the ridges on his chest piece. A peg or something there might have been helpful. It's a pretty cool miniature though. My one complaint, and this is something that isn't going to bother pretty much anybody else, is he is posed taking off, which is reasonable considering his ability to jump 1 space is going to be activating all the time. But as a result of that pose, the miniature is slightly leaning forwards. It always bothers me when miniatures are leaning just slightly, because something in my brain connects that with the miniature being bent or out of shape. I would have preferred a more upright pose, but like I said, that's a weird me thing, not a problem with the sculpt. Then we have Manny faces, and I think they really nailed this one. The gun looks just right and the pose is perfect. Masters of the Universe action figures were always a bit bow-legged, but my Manny Faces action figure had quite loose hips, and to get him to stand up usually required a slightly twisted sort of pose, and this miniature recalls that pose exactly. It's a strong stance, shooting from the hip, and of course the detailing is good and it went together really well. This one did have pegs to connect the arms, and that made it much easier to build than Buzzoff. Finally, we have our crater, which is a single piece that just has to be snipped out. Not much to say about it really, it's some jagged rocks. It's a really good, solid, heavy piece though. And overall, what do I think? I think this is another good expansion. This cost me just over £13, and I think that's exceptional value for what you are getting here. The 2 new characters are really interesting and play very differently. I love characters that can move around a lot, but Manny Faces is fascinating and really pushes the boundaries for what Archon Studio have been doing with characters up to this point. While the crater itself isn't exciting, the rules for it are. Having a way to destroy a part of the battlefield is really fun. The quality also continues to be high, the miniatures are excellent, and while the art is a little inconsistent and some of it isn't great, particularly the Power of Friendship spell art, everything is bright and colourful and really captures that feel of the franchise. I'm very happy with this expansion. I think my biggest issue now is I have so many characters I love, I find it hard to know which ones I want to choose for a game. That's only going to keep getting worse, especially once the Evil Horde arrive. But that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.